The Administration for Children's Services is the agency tasked with protecting and promoting the safety and well-being of New York City children. For the past several months, New York One has been looking into the agency, specifically into how it communicates with the public when an at-risk child dies. Annika is with us this morning to talk about the first installment in a three-part series. Good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Nice to see you. And ACS is a vast agency. It has multiple crucial responsibilities. Among them, it investigates allegations of abuse and neglect. It provides support for families who are often impacted by issues like poverty and mental health. And in the worst-case scenario, it probes the death of a child whom it knew to be at risk. And before we play this story, just a warning to our viewers, especially young viewers, it is difficult to watch. It was one of the most horrific crimes this city has seen. 3 children, Zachary, age 7, Liliana, 3, and Oliver, just 3 months old, drowned in the middle of the night in the cold waters off Coney Island. Not in an accident, but allegedly at the hands of their mother, Erin Murdy.
I know that it must have been terrifying for him because I just know that he was afraid of the water.
When Zachary was born, his parents had already separated. Soon after, his father, Derek Murdy, who was in the Navy, was deployed to Japan. When he returned home to Norfolk, Virginia, 3 years later, he filed for divorce.
We didn't work out because we were just 2 kids who were not mature enough to have a mature relationship.
Daddy, look at that.
He also filed for custody of Zachary, his only child. At first, Erin resisted, but changed her mind. In a text message, she wrote that she was finally considering giving up custody.
I'm thinking of letting Zach live with you and possibly give up my rights.
They had a court date scheduled for November, less than 2 months after Zachary's death.
I'm Zachary's dad. I know that boy. I know he probably just did it. He probably just did it. He didn't question it, most likely. Because who thinks that their mom's gonna kill him? I don't know.
What is known is that Erin Murdy was struggling. The adventurous woman Derek met while playing video games had spiraled. Court documents show she hadn't paid rent on her Neptune Avenue apartment in more than a year and had been served with an eviction notice. Some speculated she was suffering postpartum depression. Murdy's lawyer would not comment on the case. Zachary's football coach said she rarely watched his games and always seemed to be in a rush.
Looking back on it, I'll definitely be more attentive to how fast she was moving, never feeling settled, very just like, quick, coming and going. You know, that was alarming.
But could Zachary, Liliana, and Oliver have been saved? Had any red flags been raised about the safety of the siblings? ACS, the Administration for Children's Services, would not tell us. All they will say is that they're investigating and retraining. Jess Danhauser is the ACS commissioner.
We have retrained staff on certain aspects of the work, including postpartum psychosis.
But in New York State, it is the law that there be a public accounting of what led up to a child's death.
Those responsible for protecting our children and people like Alyssa will do that job and do that job better than they've done before.
The law, known as Elisa's Law, was signed by then-Governor Pataki in 1996 after a public outcry over the death of 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo. She was killed by her mother after years of torture and abuse, even though child welfare authorities had been called numerous times by teachers, neighbors, and relatives, many of whom stood beside the governor as he signed the new law. Elisa's Law sought to make investigators accountable. It dialed back confidentiality laws in child abuse cases and mandated public disclosure of what led up to the death of an abused child. And while the law ultimately gives the commissioner discretion to decide whether releasing that information is in the public interest, ACS has repeatedly denied our requests for specific details on child fatalities. Attorney Jeffrey Binder worked for Senator Roy Goodman, who sponsored the bill.
The intent was to make government more accountable, to make it easier to audit what happened, and therefore to improve government functioning with regard to this area. And ultimately, it's supposed to protect the kids.
In the early years after the law passed, ACS did become transparent. In 2006, after the torturous death of 7-year-old Nix-Mary Brown, a child with an active case, then Commissioner John Mattingly held a press conference.
There are standards of practice that need to be met in protective investigations in order to avoid, as much as possible, these kinds of tragedies. And these standards were not met in this case.
Mattingly announced he was disciplining caseworkers and supervisors, suspending some without pay. He shook up his leadership team and called for an ACS ombudsman. He even asked the Department of Investigation to probe what went wrong. But in multiple cases in recent years, ACS has not informed the public of potential mistakes and has increasingly limited access to records. Current ACS Commissioner Jess Danhauser defends this change.
I don't believe that discussing the details of individual families' lives are the best way to drive system change. When it's important, when the public needs to know, if we get something terribly wrong, I will make sure that they know.
But even if you get something right, isn't sunlight and transparency always a better route than secrecy?
And we believe we're providing that.
The city doesn't take responsibility for the kids.
Marcia Lowry is an expert in child welfare law. She says this kind of secrecy potentially leads to worse outcomes for children because sealing reports of maltreatment hinders efforts to reform and improve the system.
You can't do anything if a child has been, heaven forbid, killed or seriously maltreated. You can't undo that, but what you can do is learn from it. And what you can do is try to keep that from happening again. That's not really what I see happening in New York.
This is his role.
Derek Murdy says he'd had no idea his son Zachary had so many cases with the Child Welfare Agency
Last pictures we took together.
until after his death.
But yeah, my boy. The day that I got the call that he had, when he passed, when I went to Coney Island, the doctor was like talking. He was just like, oh man, five open cases. I was like, 5 open cases? He started talking about it. I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah.
And the confusion over who was accountable or responsible for Zachary's case didn't end when he died. 2 days after his death, Child Protective Services sent Derek a letter notifying him of an allegation of abuse or maltreatment, presumably referring to Zachary's drowning. The caseworker writes that when the investigation concludes, Derek will receive a letter telling him whether CPS decided the report is indicated or unfounded. Again, Zachary had already died when this was written.
It's coming close.
You think that the city of New York shares in the blame for what happened?
Hell yeah, I do. They were not doing their proper due diligence. I do believe that New York, they definitely play a part of it. They have a part of accountability. They do.
ACS points out that until an investigation is complete, it is limited to only saying that a case is under investigation. However, it does not say when it completes that investigation, and the murdered children died nearly 8 months ago. ACS also says that it has made progress in strengthening the agency from more coaching and training for staff, better investigation protocols, and more advanced technology. It says that it's implemented hundreds of reforms that have made its investigative work better and also reduced delays in getting the families the services that they need.
I know there's not a lot of information forthcoming, but do we know any more about the status of the Murdy investigation?
Well, we do, because the state of New York has reviewed the ACS investigation. And in fact, in that state report, it identified some real concerns, and it has asked ACS to come up with a PIP, a program improvement plan, to address how it is going to fix the concerns that the state raises in that Murdy report. But we don't have the report yet from ACS.
In your interview with the commissioner, you were talking about having daylight on an issue to reveal any problems. What are the changes that ACS has made?
It has made multiple changes, and we don't want to undermine the good work that the caseworkers do. It has a simulated training facility where they go and they actually have role playing with actors playing mothers and children in actually real life scenarios, so that the caseworkers are better prepared when they enter homes. It has gotten more computer services, tablets to ACS workers in the field to improve and make their work more efficient. It's gotten them better transportation options. So it has done a lot, but in these particular cases, we don't know.
I remember one of the headlines that came out of that Nix Marie Brown case over many years ago that was just the overwhelming number of cases that an individual caseworker had to deal with.
Yeah, and in the past, that was a very real issue, and New York has made major improvement on that spot and on that front. In fact, it says that the average caseworker has 9.7 cases right now. That is well below the national standard for a good caseload.
Okay, so this is a three-part investigative series. This was part one today. What do you have coming up for us tomorrow?
Tomorrow we're going to talk about a case that was about nearly 2 years ago. A 7-year-old girl was killed in the Bronx. Her grandmother had been fighting for this little girl's entire life to keep custody of her because the girl, Julicia Batties, was terrified of her mother. ACS wanted her to live with her mother, and that is ultimately where she was killed. So I'll tell you about that story, what ACS is not revealing about what went wrong in that case.
Okay, so part two of Annika's report tomorrow on New York One, including here on Mornings on One. If you want to take a look at the full interview with the ACS commissioner, it is posted on ny1.com and the Spectrum News app. And all of this investigative reporting concludes with a special report on Thursday, that report called In the Dark, New York's Child Welfare Deaths. You can see Annika's special report Thursday at 8 p.m. when we come back on Morning.